How are you today?
Doing okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Perfect. Your life in ministry, being a minister of religion, it's not one of the most common roles I've encountered. Certainly not one of the mainstream roles in life people would go for.
True.
How did you end up in ministry? Were you over religious when you were a child?
That's a good question. I grew up in a church context, so I'd be going to church every weekend, well, mostly, parents would take you, grandparents would take you, and even as a teenager, I'd pretty much be encouraged to go, and I didn't mind going. I had friends there and relatives, and, it was all right. But I must say, I wasn't really paying attention, I don't think, a lot of the time, you're kind of just sitting in the back seat, looking around, poking your brother or something. And see, I never in my wildest dreams actually ever imagined I'd be a pastor. In fact, I think a friend one day made a joke about that, and I just laughed in his face, whatever, that would never happen. And so when I was trying to figure out a career, I ended up, talking to my local school counselor, guidance counselor. They gave me like a book, said, here's some options. And I just basically started whittling them down. I knew I didn't want to do things with bodily fluids, so like no doctors or anything like that, Mathematics definitely was not my strong suit, so I said, nope, not that. And I started thinking about how people reacted around me, and so many people said to me, you really helped me by just listening to me. I did I? Oh. I started thinking maybe psychology would be a good option because, people listen, psychologists listen to people, give advice. And plus, I knew a little bit about Sigmund Freud, so I thought, okay, that's going to be the way to go. I thought, this is psychology, right? This is what it's all about. And so that was the course I chose, was psychology. So I went to university like a year later and started taking these courses. And actually, ironically, check this out. The very first course I took was Psych 101. Sounds like a cliche, right? But it's Psych 101. It was a huge hall, a huge lecture hall, like 500 people. Mm-hmm. And like the professor, I was at the top of the lecture hall, and the professor was at the bottom. We're walking, just like a little person walking across. She steps up to the mic, and kind of like leans up and goes, "Welcome, class, to Psych 101. First thing you need to know," she literally said this, "first thing you need to know is psychology is not all about Sigmund Freud." I was like, what? I was disillusioned right off the bat. Right? I was like, what? Oh, man, it's going to be harder than I think. And so every class I started taking was giving different schools of thought, different theories. And, in my, I guess I call it my young arrogance, I feel like I know it all already. I was thinking, oh, that'll never work. Oh, that theory's stupid. That's got holes in it a mile wide. And so I just was getting really disillusioned with it. I was thinking this would be a good option, but I wasn't happy with anything I was hearing. And that's when it happened. This little voice appeared, as it were, in my head and said, maybe you should go into ministry. And I kind of, like the whole glancing around saying, what? Because here's the thing, I mean this sincerely, right? I knew it wasn't my voice. Because this guy, I'm not looking to go into ministry. Oh, hey, no. Let's not get crazy here, right? And so basically in that moment, I just ignored it. I was like, yeah, that's one of those crazy thoughts that we're not gonna just keep on going. Just put your head down, keep going. And so I did, and another quarter went by, another semester went by, and the voice came again, the thought came again, and I was like, what? And I just push on. And eventually, it got to the place where about a year later, fourth time, fifth time, I was like, maybe this is something I need to consider seriously. And so I think it was a Tuesday, if I remember correctly. I think it was a Tuesday. And I believe in God. So I was like, God, okay, I know in the past people have asked for signs, and I asked for a sign. Although if I'm honest, I honestly do not remember what I asked for. Okay. But I said, if this is the route you want me to go, then by this Friday, give me the sign. I was being pretty bold. I wasn't trying to be brash or bold, but I just thought that's the way it works, right? So by this Friday, this needs to happen, right? And guess what? By Friday, whatever it was, I don't remember what it was, but it happened. And I was like, oh, you're serious. I was like, wow. Bro, there's this guy in the Bible. I mean, not everyone may know about this guy, but there's a guy in the Bible named Jonah. And he was a prophet of God who was called to go and preach at a certain city, basically his city of enemies. And he was like, when God said go, he's like, okay. But then he ran the other way. I basically felt like Jonah because I was like, I was the most reluctant, prophet, sort of ministry student. I was like, no, and I was like dragging my feet and signing these forms and filling them. I was like, oh no, and I was fighting it for years because I really didn't want to do this. And here's the reason why: it's not because I don't like God, I don't want people to be helped, but because actually, literally, I was afraid of public speaking.
Mm.
I was terrified of the thought of public speaking. I mean, I remember seeing a poll back then, and they took a poll of what are people most afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And would you believe that death came in number 2? Guess what number 1 was?
Public speaking.
Public speaking. And I was like, oh, I understand that. Yes, I understand that. I can appreciate that, right? Death is number 2, my friend, on people in this poll. And so I was like, wow, I don't.
Well, I would assume that the reason why death is number 2 is because in the aftermath of it, you know nothing. With public speaking, you have to live with it for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
But how did your family then take to this move from Psych 101 to public speaking to ministry?
Yeah, well, my family actually, I mean, they were very supportive, thankfully. I mean, I think my father was probably a little bit surprised, like, oh, really? I mean, didn't see that one come. Of course, not anyone really didn't see that coming, I don't think. But they were all very supportive, and at the time I was still a single man, and so just shifting from one thing to another, as often happens when you're young, you shift from one career to another, one course to another.
Did at any point your parents think it was a phase that you're just going through and you would get out of it?
If they did, they never told me that. But I don't believe they did. I mean, I think they just took it, all right, well, hey, this is the way it's going to go then. I think my parents both have indeed Christian backgrounds too, although maybe, one's not practicing as much, but I think they probably thought, well, this is, I guess, real, then so be it. But like any parents probably thought, if my kid is happy, then all right, so be it. If
Well, some parents.
That's true.
I've heard of horror stories.
Yes, well, that's true.
Children have been pushed into doing things that they absolutely hated.
Well, that is true.
One interesting story that I had when I was in university was a parent who wanted their child to be a chartered accountant. But the child wanted to be a chef. So he went through chartered accountancy for 4 years, got graduated, then took his certificate and gave it to his parents and said, here's your certificate. I'm going to do culinary school now. So yes, I've heard horror stories.
Wow.
So
here's the money you invested. Here you go.
Yes,
enjoy.
Yes. So how then did you get into ministry? What were the requirements? How did you go about? Did you have to speak to people within ministry? Did you engage any pastors that you knew to find out what was like? Or
but actually, yeah, at the time I didn't so much. Although ironically, my fear that I was experiencing, my reluctance, right, was really ironic, because I still can say to this day, I think one of the greatest pastors, as in personally impacting me, that I've ever known, ever encountered, right, was my pastor at the time, right? He was a great guy. I loved him so much. He was just a fantastic Christian fella. And so, and definitely, I can't blame it on my local pastor, right? Oh yeah, he was horrible. I won't be like him, But everything in me was just saying, no. It's like, don't do it. And actually, I realized later on, one of the things I did come to a realization on was I was afraid that if I became, I guess, a leader, even a pastoral leader, that for whatever reason, I had this picture in my head of having to be like an iron-fisted ruler.
Okay.
I was to lay down the law, bam, and smack that table, and this is the way it's going to be. And I was like, but that's not me. And that was the picture that was so strongly envisioned in my head. I was like, I just couldn't reconcile the two. It's like, this is me, but that's what I have to become. I'm like, and that was one of the reasons I was truly reluctant, because the vision I had in my head of what I was supposed to be. Thankfully, time went by and I began to realize, actually, God's saying, that's not what I'm calling it to be. You don't have to be that.
Between the perception that you had about ministry and having been in ministry right now for a decade and some.
It's been 25 years, actually.
2 decades and some. And how do you reconcile the two? From the perception you had at the beginning to what you actually have to do now on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there has been a lot of learning involved. You get to know the ropes, as they say, learn the ropes. But perhaps if you're talking about the attitude that I had in the beginning, the reluctance to where I am now, I mean, I actually do love ministry. I thank God I'm in ministry. I appreciate it. It's not always easy, but then no job is. Every job has its humps and its bumps and everything. But I would say off the top of my head, probably two major things that have influenced me, maybe even three. I'll tell you. The first was, on the campus of the college I was going to, they had this thing called the annual week of prayer, right? Or actually, it's called the Week in Spiritual Emphasis, WISE, W-I-S-E, Week in Spiritual Emphasis. And so the guest speaker they had this day was a guy I'd never heard of before, but he's a pastor from down in the States, and he'd come up to Canada. This is where I was going to college at the time. And he was a Mexican fella, right? And he had this distinctive mustache. I mean, like this thing was like mahusive. It was like just flowing off his face. It was a massive mustache, right? But he was just like, he's a fairly little guy, right? And I mean that respectfully, because I love this guy. And his name was Jose. And so he gets up for the week of spiritual emphasis, and he's going to preach once a day or maybe twice a day. I can't remember. And what I was amazed by is not only did he capture my attention, which I did like a good sermon. I didn't mind that. He was capturing the attention of almost everybody in the room. People that normally never paid attention during, assemblies and things, especially people who didn't care about God or the Bible and stuff, they were listening with rapt attention. And not because he was screaming or threatening them or shaking the fingers. No, you know why? Because this little Mexican fella from LA was preaching about things like Daniel, right? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the Bible and stuff. And as he was, characterizing them, he was putting on an East LA accent. "Oh, King, live forever." And everyone was going like, "What? What? The Bible in East LA terms? Like what?" And it was amazing. And so, anyways, but it was so, enrapturing that I actually got discouraged by it after I walked away from hearing him once or twice. I remember I went back to my room, my dorm room, and I was sitting there going, "What's the point? Right? What is the point? Like this guy is so amazing. I will never be able to preach like him. I mean, he just, he's a master, right? A master. I'll never be like him." And that's when God said something very profound. He said, "I'm not calling you to be Jose. I mean, literally I'm not calling you to be him. I'm calling you to be you. Right? I will work the word through you. Right? So let me work my work through you. Don't try to be Jose. You can learn from Jose, but don't try to be Jose." And that hit me pretty hard because it's like, oh, it's like, me, eh? You can work through me. That's wow, okay.
Individuality.
Individuality. It's something we often overlook, but God can work through you and me and them and them and them and them, anybody, and He's willing, really. And so that was the first thing. The second thing was actually, again, on the same campus, I was also being part of a prison ministries team. And the other thing I did tell you about it. I was deathly afraid of public speaking. And so as part of the training you receive as a minister on a college campus, you have this thing called a practicum, where basically you're assigned to like a local church, and you're supposed to do various duties within that local church, engaging in ministerial activities and learning from the pastor, talking to them, and coaching, and oftentimes preaching is one of those assignments. And of course, I'm in a campus which is located in an area where there's quite a number of Adventist churches all around the place. So you have, plenty of opportunities to preach. And every opportunity there's this church has an opening. Who wants to go to this church this week? Who wants to go to this church coming up? And every time someone would direct a question to me, I'd be like, "Oh, you know what? Talk to Bob first, and if he's not available, come back to me because right now. But I know Bob really wants to look for him. I always try to redirect these things. And I was pretty successful for most of the time. Sadly, I know it's a sad story, but it's true. I was doing. I was like, okay,
Jonah in the making.
Huh?
Jonah in the
I told you, right? And so joining this prison ministries team, right? I was like supporting, get to know the prisoners. You're talking, behind the scenes, just chit chatting, and this, we gathered for like a corporate worship session, singing and maybe reading a Bible scripture or something like that. And someone else was preaching, fine, and something. But then one day, the prison ministries leader, after we were leaving, she kind of corners me. She goes, "Jared, so yeah, I really appreciate you being here. And I was wondering if you would be the preacher next time in 3 weeks' time when we come back, right?" And I'm looking around for somebody I can point to, and there's nobody around. And I was like, "Yes," And now let me tell you, my friend. I mean, I am serious. I have never prayed so much in my life. I prayed for those 3 weeks straight because the one thing I was certain of was that on the day that I preached, there was going to be a riot in the church. The person that I was going to say something wrong and I was going to blow it and we were all going to die. It was me. I was going to die, and I was like, Lord, please make this message go well, please. And so I got to say, in the end, long story short, it went pretty well, and God even gave me another sign that it went very well. And it was just like, wow. And once again, I came away with this idea. I just saw God use me, like literally use me. And I'm like, how did that happen? And I was like, wow. So give me a little encouraging step forward, you know. And the third thing is that I mentioned was God has a sense of humor, right? And long story short, I ended up moving from this college is out west. This is where I was raised in the Western Canada. And I thought I was going to be working in Western Canada. God ended up moving me out Eastern Canada, which I had never seen coming. And when I got to the district I was to be working in, I didn't have a church to work with. I didn't have 2 churches. I didn't even have 3 churches. I actually ended up with 4 churches I had to work with. So there was no way. There was no way I'm getting out of preaching.
Absolutely no way.
And again, the sense of humor aspect on the largest campus, the largest church that I had to work with was on a campus. It's church campus, and yet on that campus there was a retirement home on that same campus. And so it was connected to the church in the sense of it was an Adventist run. And when I went to just visit and see how things are going there, and the social director came up to me and go, oh, can we ask you a favor? Can we ask you a favor? Our local chaplain, who normally comes in on Wednesday mornings to do a little sermonette, is sick. Can you just cover for a month until he comes back or so? He's not feeling well. And I thought to myself, well, it's just a Wednesday, and yeah, it's probably 10 minutes. No, okay, for a month I can do that. Yeah, sure. The poor fella never did come back. He got sick. He was fairly aged and died about a year later. So I ended up being at that retirement home every Wednesday morning at 10 in the morning, preaching a small sermon. so sometimes I was preaching up to 3 times a week. I'm like, that's funny. That's funny, But I did lose my sense of, my fear, and I began to gain a sense of perhaps how to better shape and be more comfortable with the crowd and shape a message, and it was something else. But lessons learned, I tell you.
From your journey you've had so far, would you change anything?
Ooh. Give me some tweak that. Like, what have you? In what capacity would I change? I mean, obviously we all make mistakes. We all did. Oh my Lord!
Your journey as a minister. Is there anything where you would say that was an oops moment, and I think I could do that better?
Oh yeah. Can I start with yesterday or the day before? Well, I think with ministry, definitely it's not. You never should expect a perfect life. I mean, it's going to be full of, like I said, learning the ropes as you go. And I'll give you an example. It's like when I was going to the college I was going to. I think one of the things I determined to do, even though it wasn't part of the curriculum, like you had to do this, I determined to take as many of the Bible courses as I could. Because I love the Bible. I wanted to go deeper with it. I want to understand it. I wanted to be able to make sure I was giving good information as a preacher. And so literally I tried to soak up every Bible class I could, even if it wasn't required of me per se, or extra. And so actually then we had some really good Bible teachers, right? Some really good Bible courses. And I think I learned a lot. I grew a lot personally, and I was hoping to share it with other people. But I think where the area that was weaker in that respect was actually their practical side of ministry. And maybe that's part of me because maybe I was a bit reluctant about some of the, especially the preaching practice. But if I could do that again, I mean, I think I would probably try to engage more, be more earnest about, try to be more, what's the word, give my best foot forward rather than kind of hiding in the background. I would probably do more practice, because I still remember, I think, being at one of the first churches I was working at, and we were having a board meeting. And one of the elders at the board meeting started bringing up this thing about, oh yes, well, the church manual says, and I'm like, church manual, like I heard of that, right? Which, for those of you who don't know, church manual is a pretty big thing, in the church, and it's like guiding processes and protocols, and it's pretty weak in that area, so I had a lot to learn, but it's what I wanted to prioritize. I always felt was give people the Bible, help them see Jesus more clearly, and so that's one of the strengths. But those practical aspects, I think, definitely would try to improve, go deeper.
So if if somebody wanted to go into ministry today,
Yeah.
what would you say to
It's a funny question, right? And I don't mean that in a mean sense, but I mean, okay, put it this way. When I was in college, and this is something that I actually did in one of the first classes you do at college, right?
them?
They talk about this concept of what they call the calling, right? The calling. And this might sound a bit amorphous or ethereal, it's out there, but essentially the calling is, do you, as a person who is, training, looking to train for ministry, do you believe earnestly, honestly, that you have a calling? Have you experienced a calling from God in some way? Now, the form or fashion in which those calls come are absolutely varied and individualized and stuff. But there's something about this idea of the calling that what it does is it sets you up for ministry and the challenges of ministry. Because when you get into the field, when you're actually actively working and coming up against the things you will come up against, you can be utterly tempted sometimes to say, you know what, I made a mistake. This is ridiculous. I am not cut out for this. Bye, and you just walk away. And many people have, I must say. Out of all the people I graduated with, I would say there's probably like 15% of us left still in the field. Of all the people I worked with, initially in undergrad, about 15% I think is left. And that's not to decry them, not saying they're false or wrong, but they were hit hard in various ways, and many of them just walked away. And so the calling is so important because it reminds you in those moments in time that what, God's called you for this. Stay the course, hang in there, And it's also a way of, I think, keeping you humble too, because it's like you're not being, if you remind you that you're not being called because you're so wonderful, but because God's grace has called you to serve, and they remind you, like, just trust, keep serving, and let His gifts be poured out through you.
So, is there like a school that you're supposed to go to? Like, what are the entry requirements for somebody who's looking to go into ministry? Obviously, I know there's things like lay preachers, um, evangelists, but if you're looking to do this as your full-time role or calling, how does one get into that?
Oof. It's funny because now that you ask that, it's like, I mean, there's the obvious steps of, you can literally go and apply to a college or university that teaches, pre-ministerial, undergrad sort of courses. But I would actually recommend, before you even do that, like, try to talk to a trusted confidant. Try to talk to someone, maybe an elder in your church, maybe a pastor, if you feel like you can get along with them. If look for someone who's godly, and maybe reflect with them upon why you feel you want to go this direction. Share with them, perhaps the idea of if you feel you've got a calling, well, then maybe share that. And because I believe God also affirms, right, those who have callings. People will start commenting. It's like, oh yes, I think you really demonstrated that here, and you demonstrated that there. And of course, not every time. This thing, I felt like a fish out of water when I was starting. I don't think anyone would have looked at me and said, oh yes, you're the perfect candidate for that. I mean, I even had long hair at the time and stuff. I mean, everyone's like, that's going to come off. You realize that, right? It's going to be coming off in a couple of years. And I'm like, no, it's not. It'll be fine. But, so I don't think anyone would have chosen me. I mean, maybe they would say, oh, he's a nice guy, but, that's about it. So, but that's a good start. And of course, prayer, praying about it. But if God's calling you, then I believe you'll know, and then just apply to whatever school he's leading you towards. Of course, there's many options these days, which is nice. Some may be cheaper than others, some may be closer than others, and oftentimes the ones that are closer are not the cheapest. But so you have to travel sometimes to get the cheaper options. But but God will lead.
And what piece of advice would you give to somebody who is in ministry, or look at the beginning of their journey in ministry, that has helped you over the years?
I remember one point in my first district, first couple of 3 years of ministry, and one of the questions I personally ended up wrestling with, I thought now I think was important to wrestle with, and that is, who am I as Jerry the pastor, and as Jerry, the person or the Christian, kind of thing. Is there a difference between these two things? Should there be a difference? If there's a difference, what's the difference? Like, when am I, in a sense, when am I not on the job as a pastor? Because it's a role, it's a professional role, but it's also a calling, right? So as a role, as a job, you do get a day off. And yet people always say, "Oh no, you're on 24/7." And if you think that way, though, that can be psychologically and spirit, draining, right? You can just drain your mental energy, and you're like always on clock, and never get away. And that can also create a sense of resentment or even begrudgingness or something, So you have to learn how to differentiate between those two things. And for me, I began to realize it's like, yeah, this is the job I have, but I almost started to centralize more, focus more on the fact that I'm a Christian, and I want to live that life the best I can. Because even if I don't have this job, even if something should go wrong and I don't have this job, I'm still gonna be a Christian. I'm still gonna be living this life. So let me try to integrate these two as best possible, but still at the same time differentiate between them, because there are times I need to step away from and just be like me. I'm just a guy. I'm still a person. I still laugh, and as they say, put your pant leg on one pant leg at a time. Put your pants on one pant leg at a time. So
Which was going to lead into my next question: is the balance between family and work and ministry? Because yeah, I know. Well, I've heard about pastors being on call 24/7, and should an emergency rise up at midnight somewhere, the first person most people will call will be their pastor before they call the police.
My house has been robbed. Get over here. What can I do?
So, how do you balance that? Being a family man.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, initially when I started ministry, I was, like I said, a single man, so I didn't get married for about 5 years, probably. Yeah, 6 years. 6 years actually. And so I was kind of flow. It's kind of, you have more time to focus. You kind of choose and prioritize whatever you want to at that time. But when you became married, definitely start. I think the boundaries become more strict. At least in my mind, it became more strict, and I became more cautious. I want my wife to know she's a priority, kind of thing. So you start saying, well, what am I going to say yes to? What am I going to say no to? And in a sense, it's like honing your priorities. And one of the things actually that really helped me with this, something I learned in seminary, just random book on, well, not random, it was a book that was assigned in seminary, but this one paragraph basically was talking about how when you first start a district, right, and you're talking to your board, your core team, kind of introducing yourself and letting them know what's going on, try to focus on, give them like your top, 3 or 4, like focus elements, like the things you most want to focus on or feel called to do. And so by doing so, right, they're like, well, these are the things I feel called to do, I'll be focusing on. Therefore, by default, these are the things I won't be focusing on, right? And by, I'm not saying that, don't talk to me about anything else, right? But I'm saying, like, if you want this X to happen, I'm not feeling called to X right now. So if you want X to happen, you're going to need to make sure X happens. You're going to need to step up to the plate and do X. If you're feeling Y needs to happen, well, I'm not going to be doing Y myself right now. So you need to make sure Y happens. If you want to see, if you really feel the calling, then you follow the calling, because I'm feeling called to do these things, these focus. And I find that helps actually not only safeguard, I guess, certain elements of my relationships and my focus, and also hopefully achieve the mission I'm being given by God, but hopefully engage the church too, because church members, church leaders and members need to realize, oh, the pastor's not here to do every single thing on the map, and unfortunately sometimes people fall for that trap. That's like the pastor's there running on the field, and we're all in the stands going, pastor, 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 go boy, go, you can do it, yeah. It's like, that's not the way it works. So please understand that's not the way it works.
Setting boundaries is important.
Boundaries so important.
I think it's there in every profession.
Absolutely.
You need to have that point where you switch off and say, "This is me time," and I think that's something that everyone needs to learn in their roles.
Yeah,
Pastor, thank you for your time. It's been an insightful conversation. I hope and pray that you do well and that your family is blessed.
Thank you very kindly. Appreciate it.